Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the EA Global Summit 2023. This is Nizam from the organizing team. As you have already seen, there was a fantastic lineup of prominent speakers and fascinating topics yesterday. It was really interesting with topics going all the way from what's new from an EA world to artificial intelligence to application portfolio rationalizations and a lot more. Today's talk will be following the same lines, and it will be by Mamta and Venkat from CCNC Solutions Australia. Both of them are seasoned enterprise architects with decades of experience in architecture consulting. The topic will be managing an effective APM program using digital architecture. This is almost like a prequel to the session that we saw yesterday, which was how to do application portfolio management using the Sparx platform, or essentially how to use the accelerator or solution from Sparx to do it. But the prequel to it is how do we really get the data in the first place? How do we go about doing approaching an application portfolio exercise in the first place? And that's what this session will be elaborating on, and Mamta and Venkat will be sharing their experience. We've designed this event essentially to foster collaboration between the participants and between the speakers and participants as well. So we request you to kindly join our Slack channel and interact with the fellow participants and speakers. If you haven't received an invite from Slack or missed it, please do join using the link provided in the chat. We encourage you to please ask questions using the Q&A palette in GoToWebinar, or you could just use Slack to ask your questions, and our co-organizers will be able to circulate back to the presenters as well. So yeah, over to you, Venkat and Mamta.
Thanks, Nizam. Am I audible?
Yep.
All right, good. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak on this topic. I did have the privilege of listening to Nizam live, although it was a little early in the morning for me here. And I think it's wonderful to have had this opportunity to speak on the subject. Nizam spoke about the tool, and what we would like to share as a part of our presentation is I suppose, for lack of a better phrase, the plumbing that goes behind getting all the data and the operational model sorted so that then that can be surfaced and maintained and managed in the tool sustainably. So I've had the good fortune of working with Mamta several years, and both of us have dabbled in APM for quite some time now. We are happy to share some of the good things and some of the lessons that we learned, sometimes the hard way, and hopefully what we share today can provoke some thought, can get you to consider an approach to APM that fits your organization and the dynamics that are prevalent there. That I'll hand over to Mamta for her to introduce herself in her own words, and then maybe we will have the intention is to have a little bit of a conversational presentation, and I'm happy to then we can respond to questions either on the Slack channel or as a part of the Q&A once the presentation is complete. Mamta, a few words.
Yeah, thanks, Venkat. I'm not sure what more to introduce except for that being an architect for a very long time, have been looking at doing different aspects of architecture and APM. I think a lot of us who are working in the architecture do end up touching some aspect of APM directly or indirectly as part of our career. So we just, as Venkat was talking about, this is obviously not the whole of all the considerations that you need to have, but some keywords that we think that are relevant to starting the APM project in the organization, especially considering the fact that there is so many different practices and tools that are available in our organization. So the question always comes up where to start, and we'll try to try to touch upon as to where to start so that it sets you up for success for an ongoing APM assessment and management in the organization. So we've tried to put the agenda very short and sweet. We're not going to get into too much of details, but still touch at least relevant aspects of it. So we've gone through the introduction. We'll start with some of the key challenges from our point of view we would have experienced in or would experience if you have to kickstart your APM initiative. And then, as I mentioned, we look at an approach. It's an approach, and every organization might want to change or adapt that approach for themselves, depending on which angle they're looking at APM initiative for. And we'll talk about what those different angles might just be for different organizations. And then towards the end, we would try to highlight how we as a CCNC organization can help to set you up for success to start with. So quickly, who are we as a CCNC? We are a global organization who's based in US, UK, India, Australia, which is where me and Venkat are located. And we're here from Melbourne today. We are a strategy and architecture consulting and training firm. We work with different industries from different industries, so like banking, insurance, health, telco. So we have experience from different angle and different industry what their needs are from APM point of view, and also from in general architecture point of view and challenges that different industry faces today in the market. As I mentioned, we are a training organization, so we do have trainings focusing specific on industry. So you can look at it's buy-in for banking industry or e-tom for telecommunication industry, and we also look at TOGAF, Archimate, business architecture, which is picking up quite a lot in certain part of the world. So we have training, and we also work with tooling, like we were talking about Prolab earlier. We also work with this design. So we have experience also looking at how you can enable an APM project in your EA tool. We, as I said, we are also advisory, so we can have a short and sweet advisory consulting activities with the firms to help them start. And our approach is always to enable the organization to ongoing manage their architecture practices. So we're not there to replace them. We're more there to advise them and help the organization to kickstart their the right way of approaching architecture. And we have expertise in different tooling practices as well. So that's a very high level, quick introduction of who we are today. But let's go to more interesting aspect why we are here gathered today is to look at what would you see when you're trying to initiate your APM journey in the organization? What are the key challenges that you might want to at least be aware of and want to tackle upfront, so that it gives you a step forward to start with. And you would have, depending on how big the organization is that you're working in right now, if the complexity of application tends to be the forefront of it. Even the definition of what application is could be very different for different people, and how they're interconnected with each other in a bigger organization. Definitely, it's a problem because I won't say a problem. It's definitely a consideration because they are very interconnected applications. So how do you go about unbundling that complexity before you look at putting that into your application inventory? Integration with IT management system and practices. So now, as our IT practices itself are developing, there are so many different practices which are there in the organization to manage, operate, monitor, and guide your IT strategy as well. So these are different practices which are existing, and different part of your organization might be dwelling into those practices. And APM kind of touch is almost all of these practices. So how do you integrate, come up with an operating model which would work for you, aligning with these practices in the organization? That ends up being the first challenge to handle as well. then the information that you require for a successful APM project or initiative requires an information set that needs to be put into the tool itself to give you the decisioning criteria. And that information set is owned by or managed or changed by a different IT groups and business groups in the organization. So they are currently managed in silo. So you can get the same picture, but in a piece of that picture when you're working with those organization units and departments. So how do you bring that together so that you can get a complete view that is relevant for your APM? And the last one is having just aligning with that alignment. It could be daunting to get all this information to start with, but that doesn't mean that you have to have a very flexible, sophisticated solution to start with. You could start with something which gives you a point of view to at the initial, and eventually you can build on making it more sophisticated as you go. So what is that minimum set of information that you require to start delivering value from your APM? That also narrowing it down becomes a challenge as well. So these were some of the challenges that we thought. Venkat, would you like to see if there's anything that you must have faced around this?
Actually, I think I would probably check all the boxes. And I don't know if this was by coincidence or it was by design. The last box is in a different color, and probably the last box, if you don't cover the first three boxes, we can't get to the last box. And even if and I think the subsequent slides will kind of cover it. If you have to unpack that challenge called complexity of applications, one of the things that I have seen is there's always I would say, to be very polite, and there's always a healthy debate in terms of what makes up or what should be categorized as an application, right? How much of details should we pack into it? Does every microservice become an application? Is a third-party software that we use on a subscription basis, should that be an application, or should we consider it to be an application if you're doing an SSO into it? What if it's just a user ID, a password? We use it to download some industry reference data. Then do we model it? Do we don't model it? There are those kind of questions. The one thing that I've also seen is when we begin the APM, suddenly it's not uncommon to see that the world of possibilities open up. There are different stakeholders who want different questions answered, and sometimes APM seems to be a place where people look for answers. We have to be a little mindful to make sure that we use APM for what it's intended to be. It's predominantly, I would say, to be used for planning. It's not a replacement for an e-repository. So some of that has to be kept in mind, because currently I believe many of the platform vendors have APM as a module. So even though some of these questions could be answered from the platform, not necessarily it's the APM module itself that does it. So important. Information being tucked away with various groups, again, a very characteristic challenge that I would think many organizations would not be insulated from that. Also, we'll go to define the operating model of running this APM initiative. Do we start central and then make it, federated? Who should own what? And who should also manage APM itself from a governance perspective? And who will be responsible to make sure that the data is kept up to date? So that's another interesting conversation, because there are challenges either ways. You start distributed, it's a lot more effort. You start central, again, handing off becomes an effort. So yeah, we can unpack some of that in subsequent slides.
Yeah, so you've kind of covered most of my slides, Venkat, but let's go to the next one. As you were rightly mentioning, yes, the end goal is to be able to plan out a roadmap for an application. But to reach there, you need different elements to be coming together, and it needs to be built in iterative manner, building on one on top of another. So I see it as a building blocks that each needs to come together before you can reach the application roadmap. Visualization aspect of it and decisioning aspect of it. The building blocks that you required in that case is you do need to have an application inventory. And then the next aspect of it is after that, you need to have an alignment of that application with your business and technology and your operations. So that's another building block that needs to build on top of your inventory. The third part is, which becomes to be a little bit abstract, is also can be looked at as a deliverable, but at the same time, I don't really see it as an outcome itself, because rationalization without a planning doesn't make much sense. It's just a point in time view. But to build that roadmap and rationalization, take the rationalization decision, there's another abstract that needs to come into view, which is aligning it to what business wants that application to be driving towards. What's the strategy, and how do you align the strategy, business strategy and technology strategies? And you go about it could be very sophisticated alignment, or we could go and manage it in a little bit an abstract ad hoc aspect as well. So we talk about a little of that as well. But one point that I would highlight is that when you look at APM, it's not something that it's not a tool. It's not. It's a practice which is ongoing, needs to be invested in, and that leads me to the way we see APM it's an ongoing and iterative process. The same 4 boxes that we saw in the previous slide, we could build it as something which is a staged approach towards an ongoing way of managing your application portfolio in the organization. So I'm going to quickly unbundle this, talking about anything you start with building the right foundation. So we need to build the right foundation even for APM, and there are certain things that we need to consider when we do build that. Starting with the base inventory of application is the key. On top of it, as we were talking about the fact that we need to be able to define what our application is, and the way we like to talk about it, it's classifying it, because you can't really give a 2-sentence definition for application as such right now. But it makes sense to look at it from different angles, and that's how you could look at classifying your application into different groups. And then the point that you mentioned, Venkat, very true. What is the goal of your APM? What's the objective that you're looking at your APM to solve? And we talk about there could be different ways of or goals that APM might have in your organization. So it's good to put that up front before as part of the foundation before we get into the next phases of APM. Do you want to add something, Venkat?
There's one thing perhaps I think worth repeating is to the 2 words that you use, iterative, and I was having another conversation earlier this week, and it was around TBM, and we were having this conversation. Do we wait until we have all the data right, and then go ahead and do what we need to do, or we just pass whatever we have information to the degree we know is good enough, and then put it in the system and let the system surface out what seems off, and then we refine it. So that makes it iterative, because if you're trying to get it right the first time, there's a good chance that we will probably delay the realization of the benefits that may accrue from APM. I think that's very important. The base application inventory, even if 60-70% good enough, I think we should just get it in, and then once it is in the system, then we can put a process to see how do we get it to a higher level of fidelity. I think that's very important to keep in mind. Again, with any architecture framework, there's always the question: what's the remit of the architecture team. What's the remit? Even I think, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves right, TOGAF talks about it. What's the scope? What's the boundary? Similarly, APM boundaries have also got to be socialized, communicated, and agreed, so that at the end of one iteration, the expectation that people may have from APM and what gets delivered through the APM initiative, there isn't too much of mismatch. So it's important to do that.
Very true, Venkat. That actually brings me to the next. So once we have looked at the base application inventory, then we start building on top of it, which means that we start aligning with our technology components to your application and getting the visualization of what is supporting that application. Then another is what are the capabilities these applications are providing. That's another level of alignment that we can look at. And then the third part is how nicely are these applications delivering the outcomes, which is the view which we should get, because it may be supporting a certain capability today, but is it something that business is going to continue investing on as a capability ongoing? That view needs to come in, because that's the part that roadmap needs to consider as well. And that's the part we look at as part of rationalization assessment, which is more abstract, but still relevant. And finally, all of that leads to you building your roadmap for each of the applications that you have in the organization. Now, just starting from starting a step back, which we talked about as part of building the foundation, that it always helps to start with the exam question. What is the question your APM is going to answer? And we could categorize them into two different groups. One could be the operational efficiency that you want to have a better visibility into, or you could start with your strategic alignment. And depending on the organization, you may want to start with one or the other. There's no hard and fast rule of where to start. As an architect, it's probably easier from technology point of view for us to start with that, because we know those stakeholders, we know those people, and we have already kind of dabbled into that aspect of it. Maybe the strategic alignment takes a little bit longer depending on the organization, how closely the business work with them. But that APM gives us that opportunity to start having that conversation a bit more with them as well. So I won't go into all this question on this slide, but let me go, which is a little bit more complicated slide, but I find it very useful because it just puts everything on the same page, and then we start talking about different angles that we can all look at. So you in the center is obviously trying to answer what application that we have, which is what your application portfolio is going to answer. But I'm going to try to just pick one or two, and this slide is trying to show three different aspects that you need to consider. One is the organization unit that you're going to be working with to answer that particular question. Another is the practice that you need to be mindful of when you're trying to answer that question, because the practice is going to decide how your APM is going to drive that information set, which is the third part of it, which is also the team that is going to provide that information set for your APM. And you can start with answering any of the questions. I'm going to start with a more easy one, which from technology point of view, it's much more easier for us to answer, is what is the infrastructure, tools, and environment that my application depends on. And today, depending on how big the organization is, it might have its own CMDB, which has that information set for us. And the team who's managing it could be infrastructure team, your tech owner team, who would provide that information. But that information is required for APM to answer the question of what is my application sitting on? How is that impacting my application? The second aspect could be that how is it operating? And that's again still in the remit of ITSM of what is the operational consideration? When is the change management happening? What is changing as a result of my change management? And does it impact my application portfolio data set or not? And that's the alignment we need to have with that IT operation team to make sure my APM information is accurate based on the change management activities that is happening in the organization. So depending on what question you want to answer, you might want to look at and having that alignment with those practices and the organization unit in the organization. Venkat, do you want to pick up anything which is more prominent for you?
I mean, yeah, I mean, this is a very, very all-encompassing slide, you know, and it kind of gives a bird's eye view of how we may want to dissect the APM. I'm just wondering if Nizam is listening. Probably he did speak about it in the morning today, and he said that the APM accelerator is one of the many to follow, and perhaps he could consider you know, using something like this as a background to drive his roadmap for accelerators. When I look at this, you know, you mentioned that, yeah, the infrastructure and the environments probably is an easy place to start. And I'm assuming that most organizations that have a CMDB in place, they probably have somewhat of this there. And if they have a change approval board or equivalent, that kind of is a final checkpoint to ensure that the changes are released to production, then they want to do an impact assessment. So they probably already have some form or value in their system that says, okay, this change is impacting ABC applications, but those could actually be systems. You know, for example, if you have Salesforce and you have built a leads management application that's a business application on Salesforce, you could have a service in CRM on Salesforce. Although it's on the same platform, it's actually two distinct business applications. So that would be a time to see how do we want to really, you know, I hate to use the word dissect, but it'll be a good point to start thinking about where are we making the distinction between what's a platform and what's a business application supported by the platform. Because the leads management could then have a different business owner, and the servicing CRM could have a different business owner, you see. And that kind of then changes, you know, if a change is being pushed, then which business owners need to be informed, how they're going to be made aware of that, what should they brace for, some of those things. So just making sure that we take one strand and then we, you know, just like the Phoenix project, get that right, have a success story, socialize, share, so that we can pick the next one instead of going for a very big bang. Usually there's too much that lands on the plate. If you, for example, if you try to solve all the questions in the first attempt to run an APM, I think that would be a very, very onerous undertaking. So we may want to steer away from that. And that's just based on our experience. Not necessarily that's true universally.
Yes, very true, Venkat. And that actually takes me to the next slide as another important aspect that we need to tackle is the basic application inventory. And when you look at the definition of application, everyone comes from a very different point of view. Today, I think one of applications is probably the only word which is used so commonly, and but no one understands what application is, because everyone's coming from a different point of view. When you look at the developer, it's a piece of code that they have built which is doing a specific function. When you ask a business, it is a piece of functionality which has been providing value for the business, and they look at as a unit that is providing value to them. And you ask a procurement guy, he will say, oh, this is the one, this application is something that I'm paying license for. But all these definitions are right, and at the same time not right for APM. So what do we do is in that case? The best answer is to define and provide a boundary and a scope of what application is for APM that you're going to be managing. And there's no right and wrong, there's a right answer for your organization. But where do we start with? And that is where we recommend that we start with classifying these applications. List them all down. Start looking at different aspects of classification. So different aspect of classification could be that you would, what type of tech stack it is. You talked about the platform versus a module or package or even a microservice. Start defining what that application is, what classification sits into based on different type of classification, one being tech stack. Other consideration could be build, buy, or install type of classification that we would do. Third could be in terms of management of that particular application. It's IT managed or it's business managed. Shadow IT is a very big aspect which will get questioned whenever we start looking at whether we need to have the shadow IT tools in the APM and not. And that's another, we start tagging them that it is a tool which is doing a value added activity or providing a value to the business, but it's still a tool. Do we monitor that, or we do not manage that in our APM? And that's a decisioning that we need to have as an organization. And once we've classified these applications, we pick the groups. We define this is the scope of application for me, for my APM initiative. And the other aspect which can go along with this is once you pick that group, come up with a decisioning tool, because not everyone, once you start expanding it outside of the initial team, you will have to answer this question: oh, is this my application that I should have registered in my APM or not? The best way is to facilitate that decision by having a decisioning tool in the organization. And that should have multiple criteria. So on the left-hand side of this screen, there's some criteria which are related to business. So is there a business owner that you can discreetly identify in the organization? Is it something that business want to manage in terms of their roadmap? Is it defining any benefit or cost associated to that needs to be managed and monitored? Then there could be some IT-related questions. There could be some applications which business probably doesn't see, but you still want to manage it in your application portfolio. So again, we go through the same decisioning questions for technology side of it. There could be some security-related questions that you could influence whether an application mandates to be in an application portfolio or not. And that decisioning tree could help your organization to consistently land on the right group of applications that you're going to be managing and monitoring your application portfolio. Anything that you can add to that, your experience?
There's only one a decision tree really helps, but I also want to caveat it is there are going to be outliers.
Yes.
And while the middle of the bell curve, maybe 60-70% would probably fall within this, but then the others probably won't, and that's just normal, and we should have a case by case dealing of those, and it's highly possible that some of these questions could morph into something else, and there could be a different question that's a more definitive, provides a more definitive yes or no to making a decision. Having a decision tool or a decision tree like this is very useful. What goes into it, what questions to ask, we could start here, and then we could decide whether something is not relevant. We could take it out, introduce some other question, but yeah, we would definitely recommend going with this, because it's easy for everybody to get a sense of why something is a candidate for being registered in the APM and why another application is not. So yeah, this helps.
Yep. We quickly touched upon, which is related to the conversation we were having about the practice alignment, is the second. Once we have defined a basic inventory and we've defined the scope of applications which are going to be managed in application portfolio management system, now that comes of how do we go about aligning with different practices? And in this case, we're talking about IT alignment before the business alignment. But when we're looking at IT alignment, we're looking at three different aspects. One is, where's my infrastructure? What are the practices which are there in terms of ITSM, change management, problem management, incident management? Can we roll them up into the application view? Are there contract management information that I need to again roll up along with your application view? And the third part is, of course, the software and hardware that these applications are running on, and the item, which is lifecycle management of these software and hardware. At what point in time do I start rolling that information into my APM application inventory as well? This has two aspects to it. This is which we've been touching upon both of it at the same time. One is the information set aspect. So when you're aligning these practices, what part of this what information set related to this practice is relevant for my APM? The second part is, at what point in time of that process is is it going to be important for me to map it to my APM process? And that brings me to the next slide, where we probably will spend a couple of minutes. Is you could take different approaches to building your APM and aligning it with your practices. You can have a decentralized approach, you can have a federated approach, or you could have a centralized approach. Depending on how big the organization is, if it's a big enough, you would find that federation is mostly adopted just because of the fact that different practices would have already been existing in the organization. So what it would mean is that you can't like disrupt their existing way of operation. You may have to adapt along with those practices and way of operation. But each of these considerations need to have a foundational element to be considered, which is, if I'm having a specific operating model, what does it mean for my processes? So at what point in time is my application inventory going to get updated? What are the guidelines and the policies related to updating and managing that portfolio up to date? Who is going to do it? Who in the practice is responsible to make that changes? And who is going to approve it? So those are ownership and workflow related consideration that you need to have depending on the operating model you choose. And that both tied together to what information it's going to get updated. Each practice will have quite a bit of detailed information related to their practice management itself, but not everything is relevant for APM. So what is that minimum set of data that you need to make sure you get an alignment between these practices and your APM process? And that's something that needs to be set aside or discussed upfront as part to make sure that the APM remains up to date and relevant for the organization ongoing.
So there's one thing perhaps I could add. There was one feature in the tool that was demonstrated earlier where you could actually, so one part is that the tool allows you to give granular control on who can update what attributes. I think that's very important. And it also allows in-line, in-place updates. So for example, if you have a business application and that has got a tech owner or a business owner, and let's say one person has left the organization, somebody else is going to take over the ownership. So who should make the ownership update, and who needs to put it like, if person A is leaving the organization and person A gets to update it to person B, and person B has to basically take that ownership. So there has to be a workflow to say somebody's initiating a change of ownership, and the person who has been assigned or nominated is willing to accept that responsibility, because it's just not a change in the name, it's also a handover of responsibility to say ongoing maintenance of everything to do with those set of attributes now is on somebody else's shoulders. And that's where it's important to get the seriousness around APM right, because otherwise it's just people can go through the motion and not really ascribe importance to it. Sometimes it's not uncommon to say, okay, there's a bunch of information in APM, but one thing that I would, if anything, it would be the minute there is in general consensus in the organization to say whatever is in APM will be taken at face value. That one stand will just bring some level of seriousness. So the minute something is in APM, it's considered to be gold, and every other system will basically start to pick that information and start consuming it. For example, a change is being put through your change management process. The names of the business applications will be picked from APM. It won't have its own business application name. The ownership, the names of the person who needs to approve the change will be picked from the APM owner for that respective business application. So the minute we start doing this, I think there is a side effect to that, because if somebody has not been really taking APM seriously, is going to be hit with a wave of work coming up their way. But it really puts APM in its central position, and that does a world of good, because then we can have a lot more conversation. Then APM can then become the starting point to talk about TCO. APM can become the starting point to talk about your end of life and obsolescence management, which then drives your application roadmap, which then has to be factored into your budgeting, and so on and so forth. So then the tentacles of the octopus start to really unravel, and I think that's a very powerful way to go about doing this.
Yeah, it's a very good point. The intention is to make sure that APM is not a static view of the organization, but it's a live, living view of the organization, and it is part of the decisioning criteria. Before we end today, I just did want to talk about a separate, with an angle which is a business view of it, and I think we can actually differentiate it into two different aspects of business as well. Most of the time, you would see that an organization would look at mapping the business capabilities to application portfolio. Having said that, that's in our view, I think that's quite a narrow view of it, because business capabilities are long running. They are existing in the organization for a long period of time. And yes, they definitely provide a visibility into what business is trying to use that application for. But I think there is also a need to expand that business scope to also look at how the functionality of the application being used by the business as well. And that's where I try to say it's an abstract view of the business that needs to be brought into the APM as well, which gives you an idea of indication of not just how the business is using that application today, which is what functionality is being delivered, what function business is doing using that application, but it also gives you the roadmap component of it, is that how that functionality is going to evolve from business point of view over the period of time, and how will that impact your application roadmap as well. So I'm going to just try to dwell a little bit more on that abstract part of it. And it's not something that you would find, the information set that you required for it is not something that you would find existing in the organization. They're probably residing in PowerPoint. And that's the part where we say that we probably needs to the organization needs to come up with a scorecard to monitor and manage and update that information into your APM and provide that context into your APM. It's talking about the fact that any time a business is looking at their mission and strategy, eventually get translated into the people process that is delivering that strategy, and also the technology. And that's what's driving the outcome for business. So we cover in this scorecard, which could be aligned to what the value business is trying to deliver. So have a list of values, work with your business stakeholders, understand what are the list of values that a business is trying to deliver as part of their outcome to their customers, and then create a scorecard for each of those applications, whether these applications are delivering those values, and are their values delivery been aligned to the outcome that business is trying to achieve. And that is a key input into your application rationalization, because the rationalization itself takes a very long time to deliver in any organization. It's a multi-year work that an organization needs to do, but the values could change. The alignment of application to the values could change over the period of time. So, and hence there's a continuous assessment needs to happen of your portfolio to make sure your roadmap still at the end of 4 years is going to deliver the outcome that business is trying to deliver at the end of 4 years. So that is a very important aspect that application portfolio initiative needs to consider. Any thoughts?
Yeah, just
there?
one perhaps a call out here would be the business capability adoption of a capability view of the enterprise, and kind of working through that itself is a pretty serious endeavor, requires time and commitment. So to the degree to which the scoring can be simplified, I think we should, not we should, it's probably recommended that we it doesn't hurt to start with a very rudimentary way of scoring it. And sometimes it's just good enough, and we can then evolve as we go forward. Because if you say that we can do that only once we have got the whole capability model mapped out, we may probably biting off more than what we can chew. So that's something to keep in mind, perhaps.
Yeah. The next one is again talking about the same way that we had created a business scorecard, alignment of application to business values. We should also look at, because technology is changing ongoing, and the technology practices are also changing ongoing. So look at having an input into, and this is the aspect which could actually be automated today, because this information is structured in quite, depending on the organization, it could be quite structured. But to start with a smaller organization, you can start with a scorecard of your technology risk as well. And that's an important aspect, especially in certain industries, no doubt. So if you look at telecommunication or a banking industry, the risk aspect is very critical at this right now. So having that view built into APM definitely helps to understand whether in the next 2 years time frame, while you're delivering your roadmap, is your application portfolio going to deliver to who would be able to manage those risks in the right way or not. So that's another aspect to be considered before we land to delivering or defining the roadmap for each and every application.
Yeah, the one thing, different organizations very likely use different, GRC products or risk management platforms. But I think what this allows us to do is look at some of those technology aspects of it, and then align the risks from technology and see how that contributes perhaps to the overall risk profile. Because sometimes, even a thing like a complex business application, as it becomes more and more complex, and if it fails to scale, presents a unique problem. The enterprise understands that they can't live without it, but they can't live with it either. So does that in some way influence the application roadmap? Does that bubble it up for everybody to sit up and take notice? And let's say if you have a new solution that's coming up, and lo and behold, we have to go and make some changes to this complex non-scalable application. How do we ensure that when, let's say, we are putting together a solution architecture illustration or a diagram or a model, and I know all of these have different definitions. I'm using it loosely. Please forgive me for that. But then if they can all be marked with a different color to say, anytime you touch a complex non-scalable system, it's going to pop up in red. Just tells everybody to sit up and take note that, and ask this question, do we really need to do this change? Yeah. And I think those are the kind of conversations that can be benefited once we tie this risk element to the APM. I think you'll find it very useful if you do that.
Yeah, thanks, Venkat. And we've been talking a lot about what our experience has been. So now this is just a slide talking about how we can help you. So we do have accelerators based on our experience. We have come up with certain accelerators which can help you kickstart your, at least give you guidelines on how to start with as accelerators. We obviously have consulting that can help you with starting and setting up what it requires for APM. And we can also help with the tool enablement and what is required as the minimum set, and then how you can take that, expand it, make it more sophisticated, more integrated into your own organization for value delivery as well. So yeah, with this I'll end end the discussion and open it up for question and answers.
Yeah, just one quick call out. Please don't be confused about this accelerator versus the accelerator that
Yes.
Nizam and team are presenting. One is a tool, the other is a way to use the tool. So with that, yeah, I'll open up to question and answers. Hope this was useful. Thanks, everyone.
It was really helpful, and was a lot of learning even for me. So I kind of spoke about the APM accelerators and things like that. There are a few questions. You can answer now. It's okay, or if you want to just reply in Slack, that's fine as well. I think one of the questions was like, should both capabilities and processes be mapped, or one of these enable for one of these are enough for business alignment?
Yep. Do you want to take that, Venkat?
Yeah. Again, it's how much we want to buy it. I would say, so one of the frameworks that we work with extensively is the buy-in framework, and it's predominantly around capabilities and service domains. In my opinion, if we can even look at broad-based capabilities and start mapping them to the business application, I think it's a great start. Going to the process level, because capabilities can again be defined at level 1, 2, 3, and so can processes. Now, yes, there are different business applications who would contribute to different stages in a process, but then that would probably come at a later stage. I wouldn't do that in the early days of APM, but capabilities is fair game. But I would also keep it at a high level and not really do it, level 3 mapping. And that would be my take. Mamta is an expert in that space. I'd probably defer.
No, absolutely agree. So I think every piece joined is a value delivered. Business capability can provide a good value to start with. I think depending on the industry you are from, definitely with COVID, there's been quite a bit of focus on what functions an organization needs to keep active as a result of making sure that they can provide the services that they're supposed to provide for their customers. And definitely banking, insurance, and those critical industries have been focusing a lot on those functions that they need to keep active. And that's where the function element of aligning it with APM has definitely seen traction, because along with function, you need your technology and application to support those functions. So without that visibility of having alignment between function and your application, that the organization can't provide that view. And that's the value that APM can provide by aligning functions with them. But going back to the point, there's always benefit. There's always merits in starting with just business capabilities as well.
Yeah, I think that kind of back to the next question, or one of the questions, which was, how long does it take to do APM for a greenfield implementation? Do you have to do it for a greenfield?
I suppose there's no magical number. Depending on how sprawled the enterprise is. If you're doing it, let's say, if you're a multi-geography operations, then probably you would have to get every business unit across geographies come to the party. If you're doing it at a very localized level, that could be that could probably take less. But honestly, I wish I had a magical number to really say. I don't know. Do you have a view, Mamta?
Sure, but I can do a bit of a sales pitch here. We can do a business case for you. Yes, and that is definitely a starting point, like to understand what the scope is going to be and how do you break it into bite size for your organization to conceive and deliver value. And that's very important in APM initial planning as well, to understand what all it can deliver for you versus what you can start with as deliverable cost. And you can always show value with a small dollar figure assigned to it.
But having said that, I would also say that the best way to get the sponsors to support you is to deliver one use case using the construct of APM and say, this is what now we can see. Would you like us to do the next one? And then they fund you for that, and then the iterations become more purpose-led. Yeah, that's what I would think. There is a few more questions, and we have 5 more minutes. I think we can answer one question, which I would like to answer, is what's the best way to ensure stakeholders are given review gates to update APM information? I can think of 2 answers. One, definitely if we make APM a free for all, everyone can enter any information. It's probably days before that data really begins to be seen as unreliable. Workflows definitely needs to be in place as you open up APM beyond a single team. And also another thing that may be useful to consider is a process of recertification. That means every year or every cycle, you look at the different teams in working with the architecture team are able to attest and certify that the data in APM is accurate. I think that's a recertification process also is quite useful. I know I think we are on the hour now.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Mamta. Really helpful. Like, we have added the questions in the Slack as well. Like, if you can, some points. I think it's a very broad topic. Maybe if you could share some, references or white papers or anything that we can publish that people could refer to later will be helpful as well. But thank you once again, and thanks everyone for joining. And
thanks everyone.
This time of the day, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day ahead. Bye-bye.